What happens when you feed a really complex legal tragedy into 5 of the world's most advanced artificial intelligences? I mean, we're talking about a case involving a PhD scholar,
Mm.
fewer than 100 retweets, and these wild allegations of a secret trial. Welcome to this deep dive.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, today we are bringing you, the listener, right into this fascinating and frankly pretty heavy experiment.
Yeah, it's a lot. We're taking the actual case files and this self-defense blood letter written by Dr. Chen Jingyuan. He's a Chinese scholar who is imprisoned for his online activity.
Right.
And we're looking at how 5 distinct large language models analyzed his situation.
Yeah, we are talking about feeding all these raw documents directly into ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, Gemini, and Quinn.
All the heavy hitters.
Exactly, and we're basically asking these models to act as, comparative law professors, synthesizing domestic Chinese law, international human rights treaties, and the really nuanced, often super blurry boundaries of free speech.
And to you listening right now, let's think of this as kind of a shortcut to understanding not just global human rights law, but how AI might just fundamentally change the way we process or, audit justice systems around the world.
It's a huge paradigm shift.
It really is. But before we get into the actual mechanics of this, we do need to make a very crucial disclaimer.
Yes, definitely.
The source material for this deep dive covers some highly politically charged content. So we want to be abundantly clear with you right up front. Neither of us is taking any political sides here.
Right, not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the original documents, or Dr. Chen, or the Chinese government. Our sole mission today is just to impartially report on how these 5 AI models processed, evaluated, and analyzed the factual claims that were presented to them in the source material.
Yeah, we're simply observing the observers, so to speak. We are dissecting the legal and algorithmic logic that these machines applied to the data they were fed.
Exactly. So let's get right into the catalyst for this entire case. Because the thing that landed a highly educated scholar in prison is, well, it's startlingly small.
It really is.
Dr. Chen was charged with a crime known in the Chinese Penal Code as picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Right.
In his specific action, he retweeted overseas posts on a social media platform. We are talking about an account with fewer than 100 followers and fewer than 100 total retweets.
And, the actual content of those retweets is the very first major data point the AIs had to process.
Right, because they have to look at what he actually said.
Exactly. And these were not, calls to violence or anything like that. According to the documents, he shared tweets from the U.S. Embassy, some political speeches, an art piece known as the Umbrella Girl comic, and just various pieces of academic commentary.
I always look at that specific charge, that picking quarrels and provoking trouble thing, as kind of the legal equivalent of a junk drawer in your kitchen.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. It's this catch-all category. Like when authorities want to put something away, but they don't have a specific, neatly labeled place for it.
Like theft or assault.
Yeah, like a clear-cut crime.
Yeah.
When they don't have that, they just toss it in the junk drawer.
That analogy perfectly captures how Article 293 of the Chinese criminal law operates in practice. I mean, it's theoretically designed to penalize behaviors that cause physical disruption to public order.
Actual disruptions.
Yeah, but the authorities in this case justified tossing Dr. Chen into that junk drawer by claiming he was fabricating false information. Essentially, they said he was spreading rumors. And this is where the AI models, specifically Quinn and ChatGPT, did some seriously heavy algorithmic lifting.
I want to dig into how they did that, because a rumor, by its very definition, implies a lie, doesn't it?
It does.
It implies there's a verifiable fact out there that has been twisted or broken. So how does a large language model evaluate the truth of, say, a retweeted comic strip?
Well, it does it through semantic mapping. An LLM obviously doesn't understand art the way you or I do, but it understands the linguistic neighborhood that words live in.
Okay, the linguistic neighborhood.
Right. And Quinn made this brilliant philosophical and legal distinction here. It mapped the materials Dr. Chen shared, the art, the subjective emotions, the academic opinions, and it recognized that they belong in a semantic cluster of things that are inherently unfalsifiable.
Oh, I see. Because you can't scientifically prove or, disprove the truth of a drawing of a girl with an umbrella.
Exactly. Or a feeling of grief expressed in a post.
Right.
If I say, the sky is green, an AI can easily check that against a data set of facts and label it false information.
Yeah.
But to call an opinion or a piece of art a rumor is, well, it's a category error. Quen and ChatGPT identified that stretching the definition of false information to include art and academic thought is a fundamental misapplication of the law.
So they flagged it as a violation of a core legal concept, right?
Yeah.
What's it called? Nullum crimen sine lege.
Yes, exactly. The principle of no crime without law. Basically, you cannot punish someone for an act that wasn't clearly defined as a crime when it was committed.
Right.
And ChatGPT actually took this analysis a step further. It didn't just look at the definition of the words, it looked at causality.
Causality, okay.
Yeah, ChatGPT noted that based on the documents, the law was being weaponized to punish thought and expression because there was absolutely zero evidence provided that these few dozen retweets caused a riot or a panic or any verifiable harm to public order.
So the AI recognized that the punishment was directed at the idea itself, not an actual physical disruption.
Right, the math just doesn't add up there.
The law doesn't fit the action, but, a flawed initial charge is just the top of the funnel. Once he's actually in the system, how do the models evaluate what happens next?
Well, that's where it gets intense.
Because it's one thing for an AI to parse the definition of a rumor, right?
Yeah.
It's just analyzing text and logic.
Yeah.
But Dr. Chen wrote this blood letter detailing his arrest, and the allegations of abuse are, they're visceral.
Yeah, the physical reality of the interrogation.
Right. And I really have to wonder, how does an algorithm handle messy human trauma? Like, can an AI actually comprehend physical suffering? Or does it just coldly process the data points?
It processes the data, definitely, but it does so with this incredible precision regarding legal boundaries. AIs don't feel pain, obviously.
Yeah.
But their training data includes the entirety of global human rights frameworks.
Oh, wow.
So when they process the allegations in Dr. Chen's letter, they aren't just reading a sad story, they are instantly cross-referencing those actions against a vast matrix of domestic and international law. And the allegations here, they triggered massive red flags across the board.
We're talking about doors being broken down by plainclothes officers.
Yeah.
No warrants being shown. Dr. Chen claims he was held incommunicado for days, subjected to 24-hour solitary confinement, and deliberately deprived of food and access to a bathroom.
Which is awful.
Yeah, this is way, way beyond a paperwork error.
It is, and this is where Copilot and DeepSeek really showcase their comparative capabilities. They mapped these physical allegations simultaneously to two entirely different data sets: domestic Chinese law and international treaties.
Okay, let's start domestically then, because I was looking at the output, and instead of just spitting out a list of numbers or codes, they really grouped the violations by concept.
They did. They focused heavily on the Chinese constitution's guarantees of freedom of person and human dignity.
Okay.
So when Copilot processes plainclothes officers breaking down a door without a warrant, it instantly maps that as an arbitrary detention, which violates the freedom of person guaranteed under Article 37.
Wow, okay.
And then when DeepSeek processes deliberate deprivation of food and bathroom access, it maps that directly to the prohibition of insult and false accusation under Article 38, which protects human dignity.
And what's really fascinating to me is seeing a model like DeepSeek, which was actually developed in China, aligning perfectly with Copilot on this.
Yes.
It just shows the completely objective nature of the legal mapping. But, okay, China's also part of the global community. So how did the models evaluate this on an international scale?
Well, they immediately cross-referenced these events with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR.
Right.
Both of those frameworks contain an absolute prohibition against torture and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment.
And the key word there is absolute, right? Meaning there is no balancing test.
Exactly.
There are no exceptions for, national security or maintaining public order.
Zero exceptions. The AI models correctly identified that if these allegations of sensory deprivation and incommunicado detention are true, they cross a very distinct absolute threshold.
Right.
It's not just an aggressive interrogation tactic. It is internationally recognized cruel and inhuman treatment. The algorithms recognize the severity of the violation through the legal weight of the words without needing to possess a human nervous system to actually feel it.
That is wild. So the initial charge is flagged as a semantic misapplication of the law, and the arrest itself is flagged as a violation of basic human dignity.
Yes.
But theoretically, anyway, the court is supposed to be the firewall against that kind of police overstep, right? That's exactly why we have trials. Did the AI see the judges acting as that firewall?
Oh, not at all. The courtroom, according to the AI analysis wasn't a firewall. It was a total procedural collapse.
A collapse?
Yeah. Both Gemini and Quinn focused their processing power heavily on the mechanics of the trial itself,
Because the sources mentioned it was a closed-door trial.
which is a massive procedural anomaly right off the bat. The models identified that a closed-door trial without a valid legal justification like, say, a verifiable state secret or a really severe privacy concern involving a minor...
Right, like normal exceptions.
Exactly. Without those, it's a direct violation of the right to a public hearing. But the procedural breakdown went much, much further. The AI highlighted this specific quote from the judge, who reportedly told the defense to shut up and answer what you were asked.
Wait, shut up. The judge literally said shut up.
According to the documents, yes.
When you feed that specific phrase directed from a judge to a defendant into an LLM, how does it even weigh that?
It weighs it as the complete neutralization of the right to a legal defense.
Wow.
Gemini parses that phrase and recognizes that a fair trial fundamentally requires the opportunity to present a defense. If the adjudicator, the judge, is actively silencing the defense, the entire structural integrity of the trial is compromised.
And it didn't even end there. When Dr. Chen tried to appeal the verdict, the second instance appeal was just dismissed entirely without a hearing.
Right.
And his attempts to send his blood letter and other legal complaints from prison were physically blocked by the guards.
Which completely severs his constitutional right to seek a remedy. I mean, the Chinese Constitution guarantees citizens the right to criticize and file complaints against state organs.
Okay.
By intercepting his mail, the prison guards effectively placed him outside the protection of the law entirely.
Man. Now, here is the part of the AI analysis that truly gave me pause. I was reading through the notes on what Gemini and Quinn found regarding how the court actually justified finding him guilty in the first place.
Ah, this is a big one.
Yeah, they extracted this concept called subjective incrimination. And I really want to spend some time on this because it's a terrifying legal precedent. What exactly does that mean?
Well, to understand why the AIs flagged this, we have to look at how courts usually determine intent.
Right.
In most legal systems, the prosecution has to prove, with objective evidence, that you knew you were committing a crime.
You need actual proof.
Exactly. But in Dr. Chen's case, the court used his high education, the fact that he has a PhD, to presume that he must have known the information he retweeted was false.
It's completely backwards.
Totally backward.
It's like saying, because you're a professional mechanic, you must have known the used car you bought had a stolen transmission.
Yes.
You're taking a personal attribute, the guy's education level, and using it as a substitute for actual physical evidence of intent.
That analogy is exactly how the LLMs process the logic. Gemini and Quinn flagged this because it is a total inversion of the presumption of innocence.
Right.
In the training data of these AI models, the burden of proof rests on the state. The state must prove guilt. But the court's reasoning essentially translated to, you are too smart to be innocent.
So the AI recognizes the logical fallacy there. It sees that subjective reasoning is replacing objective evidence.
Yes, it identifies a complete breakdown in the logical dependencies of what makes a fair trial.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure, go for it.
Because if you think about it, we are looking at one guy's terrible experience in one local court in Kunming.
True.
We have a questionable initial charge. We've got alleged physical abuse by the police and a judge who tells the defense to shut up. But isn't an AI just scanning a document for keywords like no warrant or closed door and kind of assuming the absolute worst?
I see what you're saying.
Like, how did these LLMs know this isn't just a couple of rogue cops and one bad judge? Can an algorithm actually determine if a massive human justice system is fundamentally broken? Or is it just missing the forest for the trees here?
That is, honestly, the most critical distinction we ask these models to make. And the fascinating thing is that the consensus among all 5 models, particularly highlighted by ChatGPT and Copilot, was that this was not just a string of isolated coincidences.
Okay.
They didn't just keyword match, They performed a chronological and structural analysis, and they identified what they actually termed a structural collapse of rights.
But walk me through that. How does an algorithm prove a structural collapse?
Well, Copilot looked at the chain of custody chronologically. First, you have the police making an arrest without a warrant and utilizing sleep deprivation.
Right.
Then you have prosecutors pushing forward a criminal charge based on unfalsifiable art. Finally, you have judges dismissing appeals without hearings and guards blocking legal complaints.
Right, step by step.
So, Copilot's logic engine concluded that if these entirely separate entities, The police, the prosecutors, and the courts are actively coordinating to push a case through while simultaneously ignoring procedural violations at every single step. Well, it strongly hints at systemic collusion.
Oh, wow. So it's not one bad apple. The entire assembly line is operating on a totally different set of rules.
Exactly.
They are essentially covering for each other.
Exactly. But ChatGPT offered a very nuanced, lawyerly view on this that really elevated the analysis, I think.
What did it say?
It noted that under strict international law definitions, a single case might not meet the technical statistical threshold for a quote-unquote systemic human rights violation.
Okay, because that usually means mass abuses, right?
Right. Usually requires evidence of widespread abuses against a whole population.
So it actually pushes back on the idea of a systemic violation.
It qualifies it. ChatGPT argued that while it might just be one case, the structure of this specific case demonstrates a complete procedural justice failure across the entire chain of the local justice system. So even if it's just one guy, the fact that every single safety net failed in the exact same direction proves the safety nets themselves are rigged.
And this brings up a concept that ChatGPT highlighted to explain why those safety nets fail so easily in the first place.
Yeah.
It's a term called justiciability.
Yes.
And I think this is really the key to understanding the gap between the law on paper and the reality in the courtroom.
It is absolutely the linchpin of the entire case. In China, the Constitution lacks direct justiciability.
Which means what exactly in practice?
Well, it means that a normal citizen cannot easily walk into a regular local court and sue the government or the police solely on the grounds that their constitutional rights were violated.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Constitution is recognized as the supreme law of the land, sure, but it functions more like a guiding political philosophy than a direct legal tool that a citizen can actually wield in front of a judge.
So it's kind of like buying a very expensive television that comes with a beautiful gold-embossed lifetime warranty. But when the TV breaks and you try to use the warranty, you realize the company doesn't actually have a customer service department.
Yes.
The warranty exists on paper, but there's literally no mechanism to enforce it.
That is a brilliant way to put it. You have these beautiful constitutional rights on paper. Article 35 guarantees free speech. Article 37 guarantees freedom of person. But if plainclothes police violate them by breaking down your door, you can't just wave the Constitution at the local judge and say, hey, case dismissed.
It just doesn't work that way.
Exactly. And the AI models recognize this gap. They identified through their historical and legal training data that when a constitution isn't justiciable, the procedural safeguards that rely on it can easily collapse under state pressure.
Because there is no immediate legal consequence for the authorities who violate it.
Precisely.
Man, this is incredible. I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a second. Just think about the magnitude of the capability we just explored here. These 5 AI models didn't just summarize a PDF for us.
No, not at all.
They didn't just give us a high school book report on some legal case. They took a highly localized, messy, intensely human incident from a local court in Kunming, China, and they seamlessly cross-referenced it with the Chinese Constitution, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
And they did it with a level of nuance that you would honestly expect from a panel of international human rights lawyers.
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, Quen made a brilliant, highly technical caveat during its analysis of international law.
What was that?
It noted that while China is a signatory to the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it hasn't formally ratified it yet.
Oh, okay. So technically they aren't fully down by it.
Right, and a simple algorithm might just stop there and say, well, no violation then.
Sure.
But Quen correctly applied the principles of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. It pointed out that as a signatory, even without ratification, a nation is still legally bound under international law not to take actions that would defeat the object and purpose of the treaty.
Wow. So the AI understood the semantic difference between signing and ratifying and still knew exactly how to apply the underlying spirit of international law to a local courtroom violation.
It really is staggering.
That is mind-blowing.
It shows that these models are fully capable of holding multiple, overlapping legal realities in their context windows simultaneously, and then drawing logical conclusions from the friction between them.
Which leaves us with a massive forward-looking question, building directly on what these sources have revealed to us today.
Definitely.
If these various large language models can independently, consistently, and impartially identify complex structural human rights violations hidden within mundane legal paperwork and personal letters, What happens next?
Imagine the operational shift, right? What happens when human rights NGOs, investigative journalists, or even international courts start using AI as an automated global watchdog?
Yeah.
We are looking at a future where organizations could instantly audit local court rulings from around the world, cross-referencing trial transcripts against global treaties in a matter of seconds.
It fundamentally changes the entire scale of accountability. I mean, we've always known the human justice systems are messy, they're prone to bias, and sometimes they're actively weaponized against the very people they're supposed to protect.
Exactly.
But maybe these AI models are the new diagnostic tool we need. Maybe they are the ultimate unbiased observer capable of seeing the structural fractures that human systems try so hard to hide. It's definitely something for you to think about as these technologies continue to evolve. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.